So I'm super excited today for a couple of reasons. One, I just came back from an awesome retreat. I know a lot of you are praying for me. Thank you. 2 weeks ago, I left right after 8 o'clock Mass to catch a flight up to Chicago and went to Mundelein Seminary where Father Clay went to school and was on a retreat there, a silent retreat for 8 days. The first time I've done a retreat longer than 5 since I was ordained. And so it was really a blessed break and blessed time with the Lord. Again, thank you for your prayers. Come back just refreshed and very much ready to go. Second reason why I'm excited is because we're going to do something here the next 4 weeks that we've never done before, might never do again, but we're going to put off. Normally at this time of year, all of the parishes in the diocese are starting stewardship renewal and be inviting people to make new stewardship commitments on the Feast of Christ the King, which is 3 Sundays from now. We're gonna postpone that until January, in part because we just finished the campaign. And so for 8 weeks, we've been preaching on commitments and generosity. And if you haven't gotten it by now, 4 more weeks isn't gonna fix that. And we just want to focus on something else for a while, and so we're gonna postpone that until January. But that frees us then to just allow the scripture readings these next today and the next 3 Sundays just kind of speak for themselves without kind of trying to find ways to talk about stewardship and parish commitments. We have just 2 chapters left in the teaching section of the Gospel according to Mark. This year we've been reading through the Gospel according to Mark during ordinary time. The whole Gospel can be divided into really just 2 parts. The first is Jesus' public teaching ministry. There's nothing in the Gospel about his childhood. Chapter 1 opens with John the Baptist preaching, and then Jesus goes to get baptized there as an adult. And so from chapter 1 to chapter 13, he's teaching, he's curing, he's doing all of those public things. And then the last 3 chapters, 14 through 16, is his passion, death, and resurrection, which we read back during Holy Week and Easter. And so during ordinary time, really just read through 1 through 13. We're in chapter 12, so we're almost at the end, right? Just a couple more weeks to finish it. We're almost at the end, which, when we look at today's gospel and Jesus is asked the question, which is the first of the commandments, and Jesus gives that answer, it kind of begs the question, if this is the first commandment, to love God with your whole heart, mind, soul, and strength, if that's the first commandment, why does he wait till the end to give it to us? Why wasn't it in chapter 1? Right? If it's the first, it should be first, right? Not last. He actually, to the very end of that section, I was wondering that. Why doesn't he give it to us first? Why wasn't it there at the very beginning of the gospel? And as I reflected on it, and especially in light of a few conversations that I've had lately, I think there's a reason for it. I think at least St. Mark very intentionally places this at the end. Jesus might have had conversations like this earlier in his life. But Mark includes this one that comes at the end, I think, for a reason. And the reason that I think is kind of 2 parts. The first part is that if it came first, so that there were people who just heard that and they hadn't heard everything else, I think it could be misleading. The word love is an awesome thing, right? God is love. Love is awesome. It's a beautiful word, but it is kind of a vague word. I mean, a lot of people have different understandings of what it means. It's not always well understood. And oftentimes when people just use the word love or they just think about love, it kind of gets reduced to niceness, which isn't exactly the same thing. Right? Certainly parents know this. A good parent knows you just can't always be nice to your kids. Sometimes you have to say no. You can't eat all of your Halloween candy today, right? You have to save some of it, right? We just have to say no at times. We sometimes punish children to correct them, teach them lessons that they maybe don't want to know or to learn. Likewise with other adults. Sometimes we have to say things to people that they don't like, that makes them upset, that makes them uncomfortable. It's not always nice. Jesus has been challenging us to live our faith, to live our love for our neighbor in some ways that are sometimes hard, to reach out to those who are outcast, those that we just least want to reach out to. Those are the people that Jesus tells us to reach out to. When he says that, he's not being nice to us. He's challenging us. Right? Love is something different than niceness, but a lot of times it does get reduced to that. A lot of times, you hear this in conversations about things like do we need to go to Mass, or is it important to be Catholic, or religious questions like that, like, can't we just love God wherever we're at? Well, no. He tells us how to love him. He tells us what are loving things and what are not loving things. He gets to decide. We hear this attitude sometimes in conversations about things like same-sex attraction. People say, well, can't two people just love whoever they want? Well, of course they can. Right? Love is good. We're commanded to love. That's not the question. The question is, what does that love look like? How does Christ teach us to live it out? Right? And sometimes we just need the help of revelation or a lot of experience beyond our own to be able to figure out what that's going to look like. But that's what Jesus teaches. What does love look like? My flight back from Chicago was seated on a plane, totally at random, next to this young lady whose face was, I noticed was covered in tattoos and piercings. Sit down next to her and strike up a conversation the way I always do on a plane. So are you going home or going away? So I'm going home. Where did you go? So I was in Salem. Which Salem? Salem, Massachusetts. Well, what were you doing there? So I went to learn about the witch trials. And she went on to explain that her family, she's from a pagan family. They've never been Christian their whole life. Right? They're like Celtic, Irish, somehow never listened to St. Patrick, and have remained pagan this whole time. Practiced witchcraft, everything, right? And just she's from Andover. And just listened to her for a long time, and she's studied a lot about other different religions. She studied Buddhism for a while. She studied Judaism a little bit. She studied never Catholicism, but other forms of Christianity. And she, as she was talking about Christianity, she said, it's really just about loving people, right? Well, no. Of course, the first commandment, love God. Second commandment, love your neighbor. Of course, love is at the heart of who we are and what we do, and God is love, but as I listened to her, as she explained what she thought that meant, it was clear what she meant was being nice. Right? Everybody believes what they want, everybody does what they want, and you just kind of allow everybody to do that. Isn't that what Jesus taught? No, it's not what he taught. He taught us that love looks like a particular thing, that we're called to live in real ways, in ways that at times challenge us, at first challenge ourselves, to allow our hearts to grow and to expand, that allow us to be poured out in love as Christ himself is. Right? There's nothing nice about the crucifix. There's nothing nice about the crucifixion. It's awful and it's beautiful at the same time. And that's what love is. When I was in high school, I dated a young lady. She was awesome. And one day, she wasn't feeling well. She was sick. She stayed home from school. And I decided to do something for her to cheer her up. And so I went to the store after school, and I bought her some flowers, and I took them over to her house, and I knocked on the door, and she opened the door, and she saw me, and she screamed and slammed the door shut. She did not want me to see her in that appearance. It was not the way she normally looked when we went out on dates. And her hair was all sideways, and it wasn't pleasant. And so she sent her sister back to the door, and I gave the flowers to her sister, who took them inside and gave them to her, and I went home, and I talked to her later, and I asked her, did you appreciate the flowers? Did they at least kind of cheer you up? She said, well, actually, I'm allergic to those flowers. Like, strike two. So I decided to become a priest. And, no, just kidding. But like, she had to tell me that. Like, and of course, my intentions were good. My intentions were good. Had I done it again, you would have clearly said, that's not loving. Like, she's already got a cold. Now she's like having an allergy breakout, right? And like, don't do that. You might have meant well, but it wasn't the right thing to do. It wasn't something that was good for her, but she had to tell me. I had to listen to her to be able to understand it. God's the same way, right? When the Lord has been teaching us all along, if you love me, this is what I want you to do. This is how you show me love, right? And what has he taught us? Just to look through this year, as we've been reading through the gospel according to Mark, he begins again with the baptism. Jesus goes to get baptized, and God proclaims, you are my beloved son. With you I am well pleased. So we're reminded from the beginning that our love doesn't begin with us or what we do. It begins by receiving God's love. As St. John says, this is the love of God, not that we have loved him, but that he has first loved us. Right? God loves us first, because if we don't know ourselves to be loved, we can't love others, including God. And so we first just receive it, but as we receive that love, we're invited to start living a sacramental life through the sacrament of baptism. He invites people to become disciples, to follow him, to just study what he does. Because everything that he teaches doesn't come out in his words. Most of it comes out in his actions. And so we're invited to watch him, to watch what Jesus does. And what does he do? In chapter 2, he starts reaching out to some of the people who are the most isolated, the most alone. Lepers, paralytics, people with shriveled hands. He invites even a tax collector to become one of his disciples. The people who are looked down on, who are outcasts from society, he calls to be closest to himself. He invites us to do the same. And that's going to look like a lot of different things. It looked like a lot of different things in Jesus' life, but we have to do it. We can't just wish them well. Right? Love sometimes gets reduced to just well-wishing. I hope the best for you, without doing anything to provide for the best. We see Jesus then teaching us about the importance of receiving his word. The parable of the sower and other parables that focus on just allowing the seed of faith to be implanted in our hearts, to be like a light that wells up and that lightens our lives. He goes about then doing some things that call us to place total trust in him, from things like sending the 12 out on mission with nothing to provide for themselves. The multiplication of the loaves, where he invites people who are at danger of starving to death in the middle of nowhere to just stay there and allow him to provide. As we're invited each week to renew our own devotion to the Lord and our total trust in his providence. He goes on to instill awe in his disciples as he reveals himself in the transfiguration, then starts to speak about his death and his resurrection, something that they can't understand, they can't wrap their minds around. They just know that this Jesus who is in front of them is more than they could have imagined. And finally, he calls us to live our own lives somewhat sacrificially, calling us to chastity, to poverty, and to obedience, as he teaches about marriage, that sign of God's love, that sign of God's permanence. So he invites the rich young man to give away all of his possessions to be able to follow Jesus. As he invites James and John to live lives of obedient service, sacrificing honors and the esteem of others and power to make themselves the least of all. And then he enters into Jerusalem, and in chapter 11, he teaches us that this gift of faith that we have received needs to make a difference in our own lives, and we need to share it with others and to bear fruit. And after all of that, then, he gives us the gospel, the teaching that we had today. And by the way, It's all about love. Love God with your whole heart, your whole mind, your whole soul, your whole strength, and your neighbor as yourself. Having heard all of those things now, this idea of love, it makes sense. All right, that's Jesus, that's what you're talking about. And then he's going to show us an even greater example in chapter 14 and 15 as he dies upon the cross. He's going to show us exactly what he means. Right? He's taught us over and over again. As we read through that list, the first reason why he doesn't want to give that teaching at the beginning is because then it sounds like vague niceness without all of the content to it. But here at the end, after we just read through the gospel, skim through the gospel, we got to say, God asks a lot of us. And sometimes we get into a place in our life when we just feel like God's maybe even asking too much. We wonder, how are we going to get it all done? I know, myself, sometimes I'm just on retreat and for 8 days have nothing to do but pray and go to Mass and enjoy the beauty of nature and just be with God. And then there's weeks like this coming week when we have 2 funerals. And this past week, every time we answered the phone, there was somebody else having an emergency, and the to-do list kind of just keeps getting longer and longer. I'm sure others experience the same thing. We just wonder, how am I going to get everything done? How am I going to get it all finished? How am I going to do all of these things that people expect of me? How am I going to do everything that God wants? And those things can kind of feel like just a list of things to do. And Jesus says, don't worry about that. It shouldn't cause you stress or consternation. Just love me. Right? That's what it's really about. One of the families that I was visiting with, so Leona Lyons, she passed away this past week. Oni Lyons, many of you know her, and it was over at her house. There, gathered together with her family, celebrating the sacraments, helping her through the last hours of her life on earth. And one of her granddaughters said, you're never really prepared for this, are you? And certainly, I get what she was going through. And if by being prepared you mean like you're just ready for it to happen, probably not. If by prepared you mean it's not going to be hard or sad, no, you're never prepared in that way. But if your goal is to love her, if your goal is to love someone through the last hours of death, they did an awesome job. They were well prepared for that. They knew just how to do that. As they were all gathered together in prayer and just, expressing their sadness and their grief and their gratitude for their mothers, their grandmothers, their great-grandmother's life. They were well prepared for that. The Lord does not ask more of us than what we can do. He actually gives us the grace to love him with our whole selves, to love our neighbors as ourselves, or even, as he will say later at the Last Supper, to love them even as he loves us. That's what the Lord calls us to. And at the end of the day, we need not stress about whether we checked off everything on the list of things that we wanted to do that day, but did we love God with our whole selves? Did we love our neighbors, especially those who are entrusted to our care? And so I just want to invite everyone, take a moment, close your eyes, and just turn your attention to that place deep in your soul where God dwells, where he's been dwelling since your baptism. And just take a moment in silence and receive his love. And in your own words, express your love for him. Ask him to increase that love. Just allow that place to grow inside of you. You might love him with your whole self.